Welcome to Work This Way, a labor and employment podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, Chief Marketing Officer at Maynard Nexsen, here along with Maynard Nexsen attorney Jennie Kluvarius. Good to see you, Jennie.
Thank you, Tina.
We are coming to you today from the Greenville SHRM HR and Leadership Conference, where local HR and employment professionals are gathered for insightful sessions with expert speakers. Joining us today is Bertha Enriquez, the Human Resources Manager for Renewable Water Resources, or ReWa, which provides water treatment services to the major counties of the South Carolina upstate. Bertha is an experienced HR professional. She focuses her efforts on talent management and has a passion for working with people. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, to begin, can you tell us a little bit about ReWa and what they do for Greenville and what you do for ReWa?
Well, ReWa's been around. We're going to be celebrating our centennial next year. So we're going to be going on 100 years, which is amazing. We are a wastewater utility, and we service Greenville primarily, but we service some of the outer counties, Lawrence, Pickens, parts of Spartanburg, and Anderson. We are responsible for about 400 miles of pipeline. And one of our biggest efforts that we did a couple years ago was our big dig, which is right under where we're pretty much close to what we're standing right now. We had a 100-foot or a 1-mile tunnel that was built under from, I think, the zoo all the way up to where the baseball field is. And that was to enhance our pipeline. So that was a huge, huge effort and a huge undertaking. It was called the Big Dig. So we are strictly wastewater. We've got 9 treatment plants, and we probably do about 40 million gallons that we treat on a daily basis. So we're pretty busy. We've got about 200 employees, and my role and primary role is there's a team of 3 of us, and we handle all of anything and everything HR internally as much as we can. My primary focus is the employee side, obviously the disciplinaries and the onboardings and the recruitment, and which is the part that I love the most. Working with people, and the development side. So we do have a talent development manager, and I work alongside with him. We've got a lot of great things that we've got working with interns. We also do apprenticeships. So we've got a lot going on in terms of developing our employees and working with making sure that everybody plays nice with each other, right? So there's always that part of it as well. And keeping ReWa protected.
Bertha, ReWa does so much for the Greenville community. And you've already mentioned your fabulous workforce, which is what we want to dig in on a little bit today,
Sure.
is the unique nature of ReWa's workforce and those workforces of quasi-public or public employers and some of the unique employment issues that you all deal with that private employers generally don't face or have to manage in their workforces. ReWa is a special purpose district, which means that it is a quasi-public employer. And again, unlike those employers who are fully private, ReWa has to contend with the Freedom of Information Act in its workplace and in managing and approaching employee issues. Can you tell us a little bit about FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and how it impacts a public workplace?
Well, in our particular case, yes, we are a special purpose district, but our ratepayers are basically our bosses. So we answer to them. And when there are FOIA requests, it could be anything from making sure that our funds, the funds that are used and from any type of funding or anything that goes out there for the community, or what we're doing or how we're using the monies, we have to answer for that. Is our leadership doing what they're supposed to be doing? So it keeps us in track with that. And so the FOIA requests, a lot of times it could be the meetings that they do, the board meetings. Community is obviously invited to those. They want to know about our, one thing, for example, a good example that's FOIA-able is like some of the studies that we do, or some of the PFAS, or those chemicals that are coming into our waterways. So we're getting a lot of FOIA requests on information on that. It's becoming a hot topic. So we get quite a bit of that. But from a workforce perspective, we always have to be careful about Not necessarily that we are telling people don't say this, don't say that, but we got to be careful about what we're doing, what we're putting out there on our text messages, on our phones, and our emails. We educate our workforce to be aware of what is FOIA. What does that entail? What is FOIA-able and what is not? There are some things that are protected, as you well know. So we do get those requests, and we have to have that constant communication with our workforce and education so that they understand what is that really, and as far as what they're sending out in the emails and things like that when it comes to employees or anything like that, we got to be careful that we're not sending things out there that could be discriminating or could be it could cause any kind of problem if you ended up going to litigation. So
that makes sense. So FOIA then, and because of ReWa's nature, quasi-public nature, and then with other public employers, you have a situation in the workplace where your employees on a daily basis could be creating things that members of the public are entitled to request and review. And it's interesting you mentioned the education component. It sounds like a large part of how FOIA impacts your workplace is you all having to take steps to communicate to and educate your employees on the communications they're creating, the documents they're creating, and the fact that the public could potentially access those documents.
Yes, absolutely. The do's and don'ts. Kind of the do's and don'ts, right? Having those communications, and at times we do get information that comes in, and it can be a little. Is this something that could potentially lead to more? So we always have to be mindful of that. And again, it really comes back to education. You can't keep from people sending out an email, and sometimes you kind of go, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but it's oftentimes we think about FOIA. It's not just something in the present. Somebody could ask for something from 10 years ago. And so we've got to be always mindful and be thinking about what I put out there. And even from a non-FOIA-able, even just in general from an HR perspective, we want to educate our folks to say, always think about what you're putting in an email in general, because it is public knowledge. It is ReWa property. And if you at any point leave and you have that email is, that was assigned to you, if you at any point leave, that's all accessible by ReWa. So you probably don't want to put a whole lot out there that maybe is in reference to an individual or things that happened. So that comes from all levels. When we do the onboarding, we share that a little bit with all our new hires about what you should be putting out there, what you shouldn't be putting out there. And also from a confidentiality perspective as well. So that kind of ties in together.
And when you talk about FOIA and then the public's ability to get that information, when you think about the private sector portion as well, there are a lot of things that can be discoverable in litigation. So the same advice applies. So do you find yourself having to re-educate your employees? I can see the onboarding process talking about what you should and shouldn't put in an email. Do you find yourself having to re-educate employees on a regular basis on this?
We do. We try to stay on top of these communications quite a bit. There are times that maybe something comes into my inbox where I might reach out to that individual and say, hey, just a reminder, be careful doing this. So I think you have to constantly have that at the top of their mind. There are a lot of things that come from an HR side. There's so many things that happen in HR as far as all the, from anything that you email, the conversations that are going on, the do's and don'ts, you can go on and on and on about it. And I think that it's having that top of mind awareness consistently, saying if you're ever in doubt, call me. Don't email me. If ever in doubt, pick up the phone. Don't even text me. Pick up the phone. We can talk about it. And then we can talk about how we want to document that information. So I think that's always the message. Sometimes people forget, and sometimes you just have to constantly be on it. I mean, it's just the way it is. So
from the legal perspective, we are also constantly trying to help our clients re-educate their employees, their personnel on being careful in the documents they're creating. ReWa has the added layer of FOIA that makes things quite different. It's always interesting to me when we're having a communication with an employee about a document, an email, a Teams message, a Slack message they've sent or created, and we are either in an investigation stage of a particular matter or we are in litigation. It's amazing to me how many times people tend to forget, even if they have been educated and re-educated on FOIA or taking caution with respect to litigation, how many times people fall into the trap of thinking that these communications they're creating are personal and private, even though they're on their employer's work devices, on their work accounts. So to that point, Bertha, we've worked together for a very long time.
Yes.
And I think you give fabulous advice to ReWa employees and anyone else who you're speaking with or conversing with on this topic about how to potentially avoid the heartburn that comes when an email that you sent that could be embarrassing or, you might not want to come out in litigation, how you can avoid those types of situations. And I would love it if you would share that advice with our audience today. It's common sense, but it's something, again, we need to be re-educated on frequently.
Absolutely. I'll share an example. When you have you have several, you have, for example, a supervisor. He'll have a lead person that kind of runs the team, not the direct. He doesn't have direct reports. He's just kind of the team lead, and they rely heavily on these folks for documenting because these folks are the frontline workers that they're working hand in hand with these people. And so the supervisors maybe not as privy to a lot of what goes on and during the day because again they heavily have that support there and they rely heavily on these people. So oftentimes we have to include those folks as well in these conversations. And an example is maybe there's something going on with an employee or there's some issues or something with reference to compliance or the regulatory side, because we do answer to the DHECs of the world. We have the regulatory side. And there might be some communications that are going on text-wise. I saw an example last year. There was some text going back and forth about certain behaviors and things like that. And that was presented to me and I had to sit down with them and said, let's take a breath here. Think about what you wrote in this. Well, it's on my phone. It doesn't matter. It's on your company phone. Maybe if it's your personal phone, that might be a separate story because unless you have the, bring your own device and they downloaded our information on their personal phone, that's probably not a little bit more protected. But your work phone is a whole other thing. So there was all these series of text messages and I had to remind them. Let's have these conversations, text messaging back and forth, and having these conversations through text message. That's one example. It's probably not a good idea. Let's scale it back and sit down with the individual. Now, if you want to document that conversation or take some notes, that is encouraged, and we want that. But be careful what you're putting on those text messages because that in itself is also FOIAble, and it's a company phone, it's company property. And so we have to have those situations that are kind of unique that people are not thinking about. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And the supervisor was even more like, oh, yeah, you're right. And so, again, it was a re-education to that individual, to that supervisor, and a kind of a new education for that person. A lot of times people are just not aware. They think, oh, it's only email, or they're not thinking it's a text message that can also be used in litigation, or avoidable.
And I think you generally say at the end of the day, the best way to avoid these issues is to keep your work device, and keep your personal device, your personal device. And you really can't go wrong with that advice if you follow it.
If you follow it, exactly. Obviously, there's other components to that when you have non-exempt employees versus exempt employees and so on and so forth. But yes, that is definitely a big subject for me as far as, in terms of even emails, anything you're sending out in an email through work, keep your private, keep your personal, personal, keep your work. And again, there's that other layer. In the workplace, it is concerning work. We still have to be mindful of what we're sending out there. And you might have things where it could even be something related to somebody's health. Maybe a supervisor might send some information regarding one employee. They're having some health issues. They write it in an email. I'm like, you got to be careful. I mean, again, now you're getting into other things that you have to remind them. Pick up the phone. Just call me. Let's discuss it.
Well, there are nuances to everything.
There
obviously.
are nuances to everything.
Yes, and so the best mantra is ask first. When in doubt, ask. Ask your HR professional. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us today,
Well, thank
Bertha.
you, ladies. I appreciate this.
Love
This is
having
great.
you. Yeah, and love to hear more about the quasi-public organization. Very interesting in terms of employment law and just the right way to do things. So when in doubt, ask. That's what we've learned today. Thank you so much for joining us on Work This Way. We will see you next time.